Hi. I was asking you guys on Instagram a couple of weeks back about any questions that you had for me that you'd like me to answer. And I got a few, but I wanted to start with this one because it's a great question that I think a lot of us can relate to. It's from a teacher friend of mine who was asking, how do you have any tips for coping vocally when you have to speak and teach wearing a mask all day? Yeah, I think we can all relate to that one. This is for teachers, but really this is for anybody who has any kind of a front-facing job where you're speaking all day and you're having to deal with wearing that mask as you speak, which any job where you're having to speak all day can be really vocally fatiguing, but that can definitely add some extra layers to it. Especially you teachers out there, teaching is already putting you at risk, right? Teachers are some of the highest categories of people who have vocal injury. So let's make sure that you have some tips where you're getting taken care of. And this is a complicated question, and you could go in many different directions with it. So I'm just going to give you a few tips that you can think about. Also, all of these tips that I'm going to give you today, always true. It's just that they're even more true when you're wearing the mask. So the first one is hydration. It is always really important to make sure that you are staying hydrated when you have a job where you're speaking all day. And that is something to consider in terms of don't wait until you're thirsty. Make sure that you are preventatively drinking water throughout the day so that you're avoiding that thirsty feeling, because it takes 2 hours for water to reach the vocal folds. And this is especially important when you're talking all day, because when you're talking all day, you're doing a lot of mouth breathing. So you want to make sure that, this is going to get really dry a lot faster. So just make sure that you are drinking water. And the reason I'm especially bringing that up with the mask situation is because if you have something in front of your face all day long, you might feel less tempted to take that sip of water. But it's really important that you do. So if you don't already have this habit, or you feel like your water habit is getting a little bit inhibited by the fact that you have something in front of your face, find times during your routine and your schedule where you can take that mask off and you can have that drink of water, whether it's in between classes or there are some quiet moments during your class where you can just have a sip. So that's tip number one. Make sure even more so that you're doing that. And then tip number two, what I find a lot with people, because we're wearing a mask in a place that's such an important part of our communication structure, right? This is where we express our feelings. And this is where people are watching also to kind of read our lips. We watch as well as listen. That we tend to sometimes feel like we have to overcompensate because of this mask. And not just vocally, but also physically. We have to overcompensate to show how we feel. And we have to then push vocally as part of that overcompensation. And also because the mask might be making us feel like our sound is getting very muffled. So the first thought I have on this issue is let's work smart and not hard. So instead of feeling like I need to just generally start pushing more, in case that's something that's maybe happening for you, instead let's think about getting more specific with the intention. So what I mean by that is, can you get more specific about where you want your sound to go? So if you're talking to a group of people, can you get more specific about directing your sound to specific students if you're a teacher, so that you can imagine that your sound is traveling to them very specifically in the room, instead of feeling you just have to generally push more. There's a really brilliant image from Fitzmaurice voice work. Catherine Fitzmaurice calls it the focus line. And it is a line that goes from your belly button down and around your pelvis and up through your spine and out your third eye and onto your target. And your target is the person that you're talking to. And Catherine Fitzmaurice, with that focus line, invites you to imagine that your sound is actually traveling along that line, up and out and onto your target. And if you're a visual person, that can be a really excellent way of directing your attention. So instead of directing your attention to really just push out, instead you're thinking about your sound traveling down and up your spine and out that third eye, or this point right here, specifically onto your students that you're speaking to, and then you release to breathe, and then it happens again. So this focus line is great for a couple of reasons. It's great because it allows your voice to really come from your center, but also because the sound is coming out your third eye, or at least that's what we're visualizing, then it bypasses the mask, right? So instead of my feeling like my sound is getting trapped right here, instead I'm bypassing that visually, and I'm thinking about it traveling up and out through here. So it's not going to get necessarily as trapped just by virtue of my intention of where I want the sound to go. And that's the final piece also, is because I'm getting very specific about, okay, I'm going to send my sound to this person over here, instead of thinking about I need to be generally louder, or which then causes a kind of push, or getting really worried about, is the sound getting really trapped and muffled, and then I'm not really thinking about where I want my sound to go. I'm just giving myself a target of who to talk to. And if you're not as much of a visual person, then that sometimes is easier, is pick specific students in the room and think, okay, now I'm going to send this sentence to you. Okay, and then when I'm done speaking that thought, I'm going to talk to you. And then I'm going to come over here and talk to you. And having really specific people in the room that you're speaking to can help you direct that sound smartly, instead of, I need to work really hard to send that sound. Some people get worried that if they send their sound to specific people in the room, and by send that sound, I mean you're talking to that person in the room and you're making eye contact with them, that other people in the room will feel excluded. It's actually usually the opposite. If you really specifically make eye contact with people in the room as you talk, and with specific individuals, the whole group tends to feel like you're speaking to them individually. You just want to make sure, of course, you vary who it is in the room, and you can just do that whenever it feels natural at any particular break. So that's the second thing of let's work smart, not hard. So instead of thinking I need to just generally be louder, which is going to lead to push, I'm going to think about sending my sound. I'm going to think about it either traveling up this focus line and out if I'm a visual person, or I'm just really going to use specific people in the room that I see if it's more helpful to have something solid to hold on to. And I'm not as much of a visual person. Although if you're imagining the focus line, you still want to have it directed at a specific person. We don't want to just be sending it generally into the space, or the voice won't know where to travel. But again, what I like about that focus line is it bypasses that mask, and you're thinking about the sound coming from here. So it might lead to feeling less like it's getting trapped or stopped up here. And then the other way to work smart and not hard is that instead of thinking that you need to be louder, it's more about making sure that your speech is clear. So if my articulation muscles, so the muscles, the jaw, the lips, the tongue, if they're kind of muddy generally, then this is certainly going to make that more difficult. So I could be really loud, right? But if I'm not sort of like articulating well, then it might not be as easy to understand what I'm saying exactly. So instead, we want to think about how can we use our articulators very clearly and muscularly, so that now, what I don't mean is that you now have to over effort and over articulate. I can't even keep my mask on when I do that, but that I'm committing to the sounds that I'm making with my articulators so that my speech stays clear and it doesn't get muffled behind my mask. So I would recommend daily articulation warm-ups, and I have a ton of those on the Bespoke Speaks podcast that I do, as well as the bespoke-communication.com website, which you can look into. But the great thing about articulation routines is that your warm-ups is that you don't have to create special time for them necessarily. You can just do them in your car on your way to work. If you drive to work, you could do them in the shower. You can do them while you're getting ready in the morning. But it's just some simple things that you can do to wake up your lips, your tongue, your jaw, right? And to get these muscles doing the work that they need to be doing smartly, which means I'm not overdoing it, but I am committing to those sounds that I'm making. So let's think about clear speech rather than forced sound from here. And then the final thing, which kind of wraps up a lot of these things, is breathing. So, an empowered, connected voice comes from our center. And I think sometimes because we're, breathing a lot into here, it makes the space feel very small. So it can maybe potentially restrict our breathing. And that connects also back to everything else that we've said, right? If you're feeling like you really need to push physically and vocally to get your message heard, then it's going to do the same thing. It's going to restrict the breathing because we can't breathe easily if our body isn't at ease. So in terms of dealing with that whole breathing issue, I really just want to bring back the other points, which is that if you're working smart, not hard, then your body can be more at ease in your communication. You can trust that I have my intention. That's where I want my sound to go. So my breath out, where I speak on, will be more directed. But that also means my breath in can be deeper because I won't be as tight or as tense. And also bringing my focus rather than into the fact that I'm speaking into an obstacle, bringing it out instead. So bringing it onto who you're talking to helps you avoid that obstacle and will keep the breath the size that it needs to be, rather than perhaps getting limited and smaller because of you're wearing this very real obstruction in front of your face, right? And a friend of mine who's also a voice coach wrote an excellent blog about this, which I will put below, but she has her website is Point Blanc Voice and Speech, and you can look that up as well. I'll also put it, I'll put it in, if you look at the post on Instagram, or if you're on Bespoke Communication, you can look at the post where this is, and I'll link to it. Just some things, really intelligent things you can think about in terms of how to breathe in one of these things, because it can be a whole other tricky issue. So those right off the bat are my tips. Make sure you're drinking plenty of water, even if that means you got to take off your mask a little bit sometimes. Work smart, not hard. So really thinking about what's your intention when you communicate. Can you send that sound up and out to specific people in the room rather than feeling like you need to be generally louder? And can you then trust that intention so you don't need to overcompensate to communicate if your intention is specific? If my intention is specific, it does not really matter that there is something here. Whereas if my intention is, if I don't have a specific intention, yeah, I'm louder, but I can't do that as long. And then clear articulation, right? Making sure you're warming up those articulators so that your articulation is clear even when you're being obstructed. And then through all of that, make sure you're allowing yourself to breathe so that you don't have to work too hard in order to speak. So that's what I've got for you today. I'm curious if you have any other questions or any other tips about this. Again, if you want some articulation warm-ups, go to bespoke-communication.com or check out Bespoke Speaks on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere else where you can find podcasts. If this brought up some other questions for you, let me know. And I'm especially curious to hear from any teachers out there about if any of these tips work for you, or if you have other questions or thoughts. All right, guys, see you next time.